Welcome to the CE Pro podcast. I'm Executive Editor Arlen Schweiger. If you're unfamiliar with it, the annual Total Tech Summit gathers the tech industry's elite residential, commercial, and security integrators for a few days of fun in-person social networking, ideas sharing roundtables, panel sessions, vendor meetings, and more. Like this year, there was a cornhole tournament during the recent event that took place in Orlando, Florida last month. CE Pro editor Jason Knott, security sales and integration editor Scott Goldfein, and I took some time during the event to sit down and talk about some of the happenings of the Total Tech Summit during this year's event for this week's podcast. As always, be sure to subscribe to CE Pro's YouTube channel and hit that like button on our videos, or subscribe to the CE Pro podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave a review. So gentlemen, just to start, we're here at an in-person show event again that we had not last year. The Tech Summit was put on virtually. First impressions, overall impressions of having the event back in person. A lot of great people in our industry are here. We have vendors here. We have integrators here. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, my first impression is just how excited everybody is to be here, and the engagement that everybody has in all of the meetings, the networking time, the conference sessions, and then on the show floor itself is incredible. It's really just buzzing. People are just a pent-up demand to want to be able to meet and share information, and many of them haven't talked to vendors in 2 years. Think about that. And they haven't talked to their fellow integrators in 2 years. So it's been incredible, a very, very positive flow and conversation for the entire event. Scott?
I'm definitely seeing a lot of the same thing. I mean, the energy is palpable. I feel it's like a collective exhale to get back together in person, and the feedback and reactions have been fantastic, and just the interaction among the dealers and also the speakers have been really great with really solid information and material. So very good so far.
Yeah, I would echo those same remarks in terms of what I'm seeing, and especially when you look at an event like this where it is more about networking, it's more about talking to your peers, learning from your peers. So it's a little bit different than, say, a CEDIA Expo or an Infocom or ISC West, where maybe some of these guys did go there, some of the companies did, but now here, I think they were really excited to get together and just enhance their businesses as opposed to just seeing new products. They're going to come away with this with a lot of concrete ideas from every session, at least from what I'm seeing so far. So in terms of what happened yesterday, Jason, maybe you can do a little recap of the opening day activities, who was there, and some of the thoughts that you heard from talking to some of the attendees last night.
Yeah, one thing let me point out, just so people who may not know, the Total Tech Summit is an invite-only event. So the integrators who are here, both in the security side, the commercial AV side, as well as the residential custom home smart home integration side, they're invited and they are paid by sponsors to be here. So you have to be a certain size company. It's an elite event. And so the information sharing that's happening here is at a very, very high level. So to your point about the opening session yesterday, which was absolutely incredible, we had as a keynote speaker Lauren Seidel-Baker from ITR Economics, and she is a renowned economist, I should say. And she overviewed just, I think it was something like 80 some odd slides, but amazing to have an economist that actually kept everybody engaged. It was incredible information. But the long and short of it was using their tracking mechanism that they have had in place at ITR that has on average 96% accuracy for predicting what's going to happen in the economy. And they're showing and I'll just put a kind of a nutshell on it, a slowing growth that's going to take place in 2022. Not recessionary situation, but slowing growth in 2022. Followed by, in 2023, but followed by a small, as she called it, pothole recession in 2025. So a very small downward trend in 2025, then followed again by upward trajectory growth in after that recession, 2026 through 2029. But kind of the big news was that they predict a very, very deep recession starting. Very, very deep depression starting in 2030. And so I think gave every single integrator in the room pause to look at developing, as I jokingly said, their 9-year business plans. So Scott, what was your impression?
It was a fantastic session. I mean, there was so much information, like you said, all those slides, but she presented the material in a way that kept it engaging. She was very lively, and just the material was phenomenal. I think it did spook some people, the depression on the horizon. Hopefully they'll be prepared for it, at least the ones that were here to hear it firsthand and get that news ahead of time. But the entire session was great. You know, the website stuff, we had an analyst come in and analyze websites of the attending integrators, and they got report cards. And I've heard back from some of them, you know, they really appreciated that. And even some of the ones that didn't score so well, you know, they're looking at that to really improve their sites. So fantastic overall.
Yeah, I was going to add to that it was kind of a nice daily double to start off this event, because it was the keynote of all about the economy, and then the second session after that was all about how you really need to use these next 9 years to just figure out how to best maximize your team's productivity, and really just grow so that you're not in a bad position come 2030. So everyone's been warned. And that session, again, I thought that was great. That was one firefly, Ron Callis, who came in, and unbeknownst to the attendees, everyone had their website scored with something like 20 categories, 20 metrics that they look at. The good news is that Ron Callis had done this a few years ago, and a lot of integrators' websites just flunked. Just flat out were horrible. But the better news is that in those few years, a lot of the integrators have done a much better job of certain areas, just being more engaged on the site. There are certainly some things that people can do a lot better, but just having that second thing, there was also Tim Begonis from D-Tools and Mark from AVIQ also helping out ways that integrators can up their digital presence over this, next important decade.
Yeah, I thought that was really valuable. I mean, there are not many conferences that you can go to where you are going to get direct feedback on your business. So a lot of times everybody talks in these kind of 30,000 foot view circles, but that presentation was, as Scott mentioned, just direct feedback on the quality of their websites. And I believe the scorecard, it was a report cards, not scorecards, report cards, that 18% flunked. And he had done it previously, and there was 60% flunkage. Is flunkage a word? I don't know. Flunkage. Yeah. So only to have 18% flunk was pretty darn good, and I think 18% got A's. So it was interesting to see kind of that pivot point out there with all the different criteria that he analyzed. And I noticed that nobody was embarrassed, nobody was put on the spot. He did point out some of the key ones that did great. So everybody, the guys who did great, got some kudos in front of the entire audience. But everybody got
all three tracks too. So it was good to see a nice representation of the security guys doing better websites, the commercial guys creating better websites, and the residential guys, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was great. They all got their report cards privately, and I did notice that we had them pick them up as they left the room, that there were quite a few that guys, they didn't pick it up. And I talked to the integrators afterwards, and they said, I didn't pick it up because I was afraid to look at what the letter was, because I know what it's probably starts with an F. So Scott, any other impressions? Tell us a little bit about how the security sales and integration events went this morning with the conferences.
Exceptional. We had a customer service session, and we always hear integrators saying, oh, we have the best customer service, but usually it's just lip service. So this was a real drill down session with some of the industry leaders like Kirk McDowell and Sean Castillo and Richard Ginsburg. And so from all different facets of the security side, you had the alarm dealer side, you had the consultant, and then you had the hardcore commercial integrator on the security side. And they were all giving just great nuggets of information to really track your customer service and what to do correctively, when there's an issue. And so you can tell, by the engagement of the Q&A, really helps tell you how you're hitting the mark. And just the feedback afterwards was fantastic. So we had that session, and then later on we did one on the opportunity in multiple dwelling units. And there's a lot of great opportunity there, and we found that there's probably not enough security integrators yet jumping into that market, but hopefully this will entice them to do so. And one of the presenters there is from South Florida, and he had some really interesting information related to the condo collapse. How that's going to have ramifications and manifest in new regulations that are not only going to affect, integration, but also affect, the lending, how these things are funded. And so that was really fascinating. And also just talking about, smart homes moving into multiple dwellings. So great opportunity and great sessions.
That sounds like a really interesting session. We actually touched on the MDU market in one of the luncheon sessions for CE Pro today, particularly talking about the common area element of it, that right now you look at the fitness center or the lobby of a multi-dwelling unit, and they need access control, gate access control, surveillance. But the networking part is really the driver, that people, they will be able to actually get higher rents if they have high performance networking in their apartment dwelling. And we weren't talking about luxury condominiums or anything like that. I would be very interested to find out more information, and I'm sure we'll be able to read about it in security sales and integration on that regulation from that condo collapse. That's very interesting. It's not an element that we brought into it. So Arlen, you had a session this morning that was fantastic, related to the value plus and minuses of having a showroom. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, that was definitely a fun one to put together. I mean, I think with all of us, when we talk to integrators, some of the more interesting points are how they use their own facilities. And of course, over the last year and a half, there's one of the things that we had on, and we had on three very successful integrators, mostly doing quite well with the luxury home builders, custom home builders, some track building. But and we also had David Weinstein from Lutron on as well to talk about how they're using these different experience centers and showrooms. And it was interesting, for one thing, talking about certainly the virtual elements, of course, that a lot of them were able to kind of successfully pivot. And that was something interesting. And that's something that I had talked to over the last year with some of the other integrators about how they're using, we might not like Zoom, but for some of these guys, if they're doing, say, they want to put on an educational event for a bunch of architects or a bunch of designers, they can do that from their showroom now, actually, and not even have the people come to the showroom. And yet they can, walk them around the facility, show them different things, but they can do all these sort of virtual showrooming to a lot of people at one time, which was one big element of it. One thing that we had gone over was, it was just, we wanted to give a lot about investing in the showroom, the different reasons for doing so, different things that they're prioritizing. So it was kind of interesting seeing someone like Doug Duchan of Ecosystems talking about, purchasing granite countertops and, really kind of up their appliances and all these things that, he's thinking about, well, how can I present, say, a living room, a kitchen, or something like that, where they know some of the affluent suburbanites and some of the handlers, some of the designers, the architects who are going to come in, they're going to see a company like that and see that, all right, if I'm a designer who works for someone, this is what my client's going to want. They want the whole package. So it was just kind of interesting seeing some different things that they're putting together. One of them, John Prince of 5 Smooth Stones AV, actually is breaking ground on a new facility in 2022, and it's interesting from him because he's on his third iteration of a showroom, and they've all kind of had different specialties here and there. And then I had Kyle Steele on from Global Wave Integration, who we focused on in October, CE Pro, who is using the showroom a lot. And again, his actual clients will never set foot in that showroom because they are all, we're talking about millionaires who have people going in to do the bidding for them. But again, it is looking at some of the cutting edge technologies. They've outfitted their showroom with a ton of Ketra and human-centric lighting and all of that. And so they're trying to educate some of these handlers on this new technology, and that was a very big impetus for them to put together this multi-million-dollar showroom in Southern California.
So a couple of takeaways from the session that I'll add to that is that Doug Duchamp from Ecosystems, who you mentioned that they have a 50% higher average ticket sale when a customer does get into their showroom. And then the other thing that I had never even heard of this, and we'll find out a little bit more about it once I get back and dig into it, is he mentioned that they have a aesthetic certification from the AIA and the ASID for running what they call the 5 principles of concealment, for showing off how they conceal the technology. So I'd never heard of that before, ever, which is interesting. So let me ask you, Scott, one thing that's really unique about this event is there's no other event where security integrators, commercial AV integrators, and smart home integrators are gathered together. There are conferences within each of those niche areas, within each of the verticals, within each of the segments. And there are universal problems like workforce development and supply chain. And then there's other opportunities to learn from each other, like recurring revenue and handling elite customers and those sorts of things. What do you see as kind of the best, some of the probable takeaways that they can learn, these integrators can learn from each other when they're all together?
There's so many. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all entrepreneurs, and they're all in a certain, range, and they're all, high level, even if it's not, monetarily an enormous level. They're high level in terms of their, integrator IQ, if you will. And as you mentioned, Jason, so many of those commonalities in just running a business like that, that's based on service and based on installations and those types of things. And there's so much that they can share. And, the technology is merging, it's converging. And so, the people that handle it, and their skill sets and their needs are also converging. So I hear, tremendous interaction. Some of them are kicking and screaming a little bit, I think, but it might be a little bit of tough love they need to open their arms a little bit to some of those on the other side. But at the end of the day, they have a lot more in common than they have different. And so, this is a very unique event in that regard. And that's one of the things I really, really appreciate about it. And I think that the attendees do as well.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected also in the sponsor base. We see out there in the sponsors all have these one-on-one appointments with the integrators as well as the boardroom sessions. And you see monitoring centers out there, third-party central stations out there on the show floor. You see big distributors out there. You see, high-performance audio and video equipment providers out there. So it's a diverse mix, and as you say, it's all so the sponsor base is very diverse too. But I think it is kind of all melding in some cases. One thing I find interesting and is that, we all know what happened with the pandemic and that the commercial market, corporate AV market took a hit, and people working from home and not being in their offices and obviously not being in restaurants and bars, which are kind of key categories for the commercial AV space. But at the same time, the residential space and the security space went on fire because there was the civil unrest, which was also happening, which spurred a lot more people wanting to get security systems. Everybody was at home needing to be entertained. So let me ask you this, Arlen. One of the things I've heard from some people is like, I'm so busy in my own niche. I'm so busy as a security guy, I don't really have time to deal with commercial AV or smart home. I'm so busy as a smart home integrator, I don't have time to deal with commercial AV or security. And likewise, commercial AV guys, I think, struggle with moving into some of those categories. So what do you hear from integrators in terms of the benefit of this event and how they can, do they want to migrate and be diverse, or do they want to just be successful in their niches?
Well, I think some of them definitely do, and I think part of that we saw, and you could talk a little bit more about the session that you moderated today about Resi-Mercial, where we were talking about the MDUs as you touched upon before, but then with Sean Hansen of Logic Integration, it was still pretty amazing hearing him talk about just the transformation that company made following the previous Great Recession into the commercial market. And events like this, I don't know if that would have been something that they would have done without having been a perennial attendee to an event like this, where they can, certainly talk to peers in that sector. But they made a pretty big change to where, what did Sean say? They're about 60 to 70% now all commercial as opposed to residential. So I think there are definitely things going in that direction. And then, it's funny, you still hear from the residential guys. I'll hear it sitting at the table when they're talking about the security guys and how during that time, of course, RMRs would help keep them afloat back, over a decade ago now. And I think that with all of the evangelizing that you've done and that we've done for CE Pro in terms of talking about, hey, look at the security market, how can you get recurring revenue, and look at some of the categories, if it's not going to be in security, maybe it's going to be through, network management, power management, something like that. But just that idea of the recurring revenue, I think, again, it's something that having an event like this really shows that there are some of those crossover opportunities. In terms of from the commercial guys going into the residential, I think there, is probably going to be a bit of a kickback there. But I think for some of those guys, they're seeing that that's just where the opportunities are going to be. So that's something that, maybe they come to an event like this and maybe they were thinking, well, I'm not so sure I want to get into it, but the more they talk to some of the other attendees here, maybe that will sway them, maybe it won't sway them. But I would say that the uniqueness of this event certainly seems to spur those conversations.
If I could just add to that, I would say also if they're not expanding their own business into it, they can make contacts and connections at this event for those that focus in that particular area and forge new partnerships in that way. I mean, not every company has to be all things to all people. And so this covers all those bases, and also, geographically too. I mean, they make partnerships where they can expand their business, get a little piece of something, or share, in that way too. So there's all kinds of ways that you can grow your business by mixing like this. And, when you talk about the markets changing, one thing I wanted to throw out there too was in our MDU session, John Boutram from ADT, he mentioned that half of their multi-dwelling unit sales now are automation rather than security. Half of them don't even have security now. So that's really a very interesting development in the market when we talk about the convergence and the way things are changing.
Yeah, it is one of the interesting things on the security side, especially. You see the big companies like ADT and Vivint really doing cutting edge stuff with moving into solar. And, Vivint just had the announcement the other day how they're now selling homeowners insurance policies. You mentioned the smart home automation. And it's an interesting development to see. Really, the market in some cases gets led, at least in terms of the residential space, it gets led by some of these bigger players versus the independents.
That's true. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And Brinks Home also just got into the solar. So that is really an interesting area to follow now, and another big opportunity that I think and hope that's going to trickle down throughout the industry.
Yep. We'll all be driving electric vehicles, right, in the next 5 years? That's what they say, at least. So one other point I wanted to make that just shows the interesting dynamic that we have in the conversations. One of the elements that we talked about was the home office. So we would have gone into this conversation thinking, oh, boy, everybody's home office business must have just exploded with the pandemic. Everybody was working from home. The kids were all distance learning. Everybody had crummy networks that were just done by the cable company. And Yet in the conversation that came out from the panelists and from the audience is that there is a tremendous gap in the market between the DIY solutions and these professional solutions that they might bring to the CEO or CFO of a company who's decided who had to work from home during the pandemic. But all the other Joe Schmoes like us who just kind of had to fend for their own in terms of let's find a bigger monitor, let's get our network upgraded a little bit. But it really wasn't this boon that we thought it was going to be in that home office environment, which is an interesting thing because we would think that the commercial AV guys, in fact, Avixa had numbers that showed a lot more commercial guys actually moved into the residential space than they had in the past, that they may have been confronted by the same thing, this of, wow, we're going to move into the home office market, and then finding that it's not really as lucrative as they thought it was going to be.
I will say that on the security side, I have seen a lot of security companies expanding into, or getting more robust in their home networking involvement. So the backbone of it and the infrastructure is an area that they have seen opportunity for in the home office in terms of, all the other bells and whistles and high-end stuff, not necessarily, but that's, an exciting part of it too.
Yeah, I'll add to that and just say that throwing in some of the CE Pro research that we had with that session was also just kind of illuminating too, because it was interesting to see that displays and having larger displays was basically at the same demand as the networking, and just the fact that I think for for a lot of the residential guys, it was just that they were doing projects throughout the house, so they wound up putting in a lot more networking. It wasn't necessarily going to be for CEOs, but it was going to be part of a full project for a house. It was interesting, though, that Sean Hansen, I think, was the one saying that the C-suite, when they had to be doing something from their homes, wanted things done a little more, have it nice and polished and professional looking, and, really kind of that hierarchy of whatever company they're in. But a lot of times the referrals were coming because, the residential people were working on their homes to begin with. So it was just another excuse to do that. I do want to follow up one interesting thing from the showroom session, just something that Kyle Steele had thrown in there about just working in California and solar. And it sounds like almost every integrator who is going to be working in new construction has to have some sort of tie into solar in the future. And of course on CE Pro, we're talking about solar tied into energy storage, energy management, all sorts of opportunities there too. And we'll just give a plug in our January issue. I think we're going to have that potentially as one of the hot technologies to watch next year. So gentlemen, any further thoughts on the Total Tech Summit? If not, I think we've had a great time here. We still have a day to go as of this recording to send everyone home for the weekend and into Thanksgiving break. But to me, again, it's the energy of the event. I felt is the energy, the uniqueness, just really great to see as something to bring everyone together. Definitely.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that just what we've discussed here, you can see get a sense of the high level nature of the discussions that are taking place amongst the integrators, between the integrators and the sponsors, between each of the 3 tracks that are taking place. So it's a great event, and we're excited to be here. And by the way, you forgot to mention one of the most important and most interesting things that came out of that home office study was that 7% of the home offices were put in bathrooms. So I think there's some sort of sound masking technology. Who's been on a call where you heard a flush? I've actually been on calls,
and people were raising their hands when you asked that too. We've all seen it.
So that's not the biggest takeaway, but that's one of the takeaways. Scott.
Yeah, I want to say it's so good that we're going to do it all again next year, same place, a little bit earlier in late October, but really looking forward to that based on the momentum from this one. So.
All right, and with that, we will sign off from the Total Tech Summit. We'll look forward to doing this again next year in Orlando, late October, and gather all these great minds together once again. And for the CE Pro audience, look for future coverage coming up pretty soon of the event.